Hey, thanks for hanging out. I'm Rachelle and you're listening to Thoughts About That. Hi, Suzann.
Hi, Rachelle.
Yes, I'm so glad that you're here today. So I'm here with Suzann Wade. She is my friend. How long have we known each other now?
Oh, what, like 4 or 5 years, maybe?
Has it been that long?
Well, I don't know. I have no idea. It was pre-pandemic that we met.
It was pre-pandemic. Okay. The after times.
Yes.
We've been friends for a while. Well, I'm so glad you're so cute. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Thank you for hanging out with me. I know it's early. And so tell the people who you are and introduce yourself.
I'm Suzann Wade, and my business that I have is called Wade Innovation. Okay. I teach people creative problem solving and ways to intentionally think through the challenges in life, whether it's personal or professional. Love working with individuals, solo entrepreneurs, and also teams. So team trainings are a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, I've actually gone through your training and I think it's amazing. Tell me, like, if you described yourself or introduced yourself personally, like, how would you say?
I am born and raised in Oklahoma City, married for going on 28 years now. I have 2 kids, my daughter who's 25 and a son who's 22. And one lovely dog, Teddy, and then I have a grandpup.
Nice.
And I I'm just thankful for each and every day. I am going on 23 years now that I'm a survivor of brain cancer. Wow. And so, I'm about to be 52 in 2 weeks. And when you're told when you're 28 years old, you'll never see 30. Every year is a great year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and every day,
every day is a great day.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I can't imagine, that journey, and you've shared a little bit about that over coffee. Today, particularly, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity, and I think that's kind of a lot of what our conversations, circulate around, and
we bond over our neurodiversity.
Yeah, we do. We found each other. Our brains found each other. So, today we're going to be talking about neurodiversity. This may be a new term for a lot of people. I don't think some people may not have heard of the word divergence since the movie, but it's not. It's not like neuroscience. It was actually coined by a sociologist to explain the differences of brain types. So tell me, when you think about neurodiversity, if you were saying it to someone who had never heard of the term, didn't know what it meant, what would you tell them?
Well, I think first off, for me, it's recognizing, like you say, sociologically, diversity in general, when we're talking about groups of people, really refers to what is different than the socially accepted typical.
Right.
And so that applies to the way we think and the way our brains respond to the world around us. And it really... all of our brains are different,
right?
And so for me, there's like a spectrum, essentially, of how brains respond to what is happening around us. And so I think if you think about neurotypical in our society, I am a huge fan of public schools. I'm a huge fan of teachers, but our institutionalized educational system means that from a very young age, we institutionalize and mold what is socially acceptable in terms of brains and how we think. And I think that's where the divergence comes in, because really it's neurodiversity is actually term that's kind of hip right now too.
Right.
I mean, if you watch like TikTok and stuff, you know,
that's where I found it.
There's and the thing is that like originally on TikTok, it felt like people being able to find each other, you know, people who are neurodiverse being able to come together and find each other and go, wow, you aren't alone, you know, and helping people know you aren't alone. But then it almost became popularized, you know, so that like lots of people were like, oh yeah, I think me too. That happens to me too. And I was having like a majorly deregulated moment for my brain where I could not stop fixating the other night. Like it took me 3 hours to change my shoes. I mean, it was that kind of moment. And so my brain fixates on getting information out.
Okay. Getting information out, not in. Getting
information out because it's like there's a constant narrative in my brain, just constant.
Like an internal dialogue.
Yes. And it never stops at all.
I know people that don't have an internal dialogue and it's very odd.
Yeah. And so it's always there and almost always kind of like not screaming, but like this has to get out. I'm going to explode if it doesn't, you know? And so literally it was 3 hours not being able to change my shoes.
What stopped you from being able to change
Because I had to like get it out there and I was all alone. And so how do I get it out there? Because I'm all alone.
So what do you do?
Well, I tried to make reels.
Okay.
And
creating content is a great way to get it out.
But it also like is so like exhausting. And like every time I was trying to make the reel, I was like, no, that's not it. So delete. That's not it. Delete. Right. That's not it. Delete. And so finally I was like, I'm going to do Facebook Live. And in the middle of that Facebook Live, it's awkward for me as a white woman to say this. And so help me if I start treading on ground. But I remember like when Black Lives Matter was happening, how our Black friends had to speak wisdom and insight into us and say, no, the experience of getting nervous around the police that you may have, that's not the same, you know? And no, it is not the same because it sort of was like, there was this response of like, oh, those things happen to me too. Not, you know, but it's kind of that thing that I feel like for people who are, really neurodiverse, that it immobilizes them sometimes.
Like that executive functioning.
Yes, that executive functioning, whatever it may be that immobilizes you, that you just can't move on to the next thing, without somebody intervening and redirecting you.
Okay. I like that. I think about there every day, like I have to do research. So if I don't, I don't feel complete. Like I have to do that. And so I love that you talked about like the creating content, because that is external versus what I'm doing is like intaking information. Yeah. Okay. So do you ever find that like with executive functioning that it prohibits you from doing simple things like brushing your teeth, doing your hair?
Oh, yeah, very much so. And I just like to kind of back up here for a minute and explain where my neurodiversity came from. Yeah, I have a golf ball size hole in the right semiparietal lobe of my brain because that's where my brain tumor was. And so that when they remove the tumor, that's the sensory processing. A lot of the sensory processing in your brain goes through there. And my brain rewired and learned to do a lot of that. But that's amazing. Yeah, it is. A great story about right after my surgery, when I first woke up, I was in a little area that was surrounded by curtains, and there was a nurse at my feet and a nurse at my head. And then the doctors were right there. So it was a very small space. So I could like see them. And that night in ICU, my memories are all of like Dan right beside my bed. And sometimes I would see the nurse that would come in. But the next day when I was in a regular room, there was a giant window on the side of the room and it was just white. And I was like, but we were in San Francisco. Because if you ever have a brain tumor, go to a brain tumor center. I'm just going to throw this in there. You know anybody with a brain tumor, go to a brain tumor center. Anybody ever tells you there's nothing we can do, that's the doctor saying there's nothing that I can do for you. Right. Understand that. That's my little plug that I have to put in here. But anyway, this window was just white and it was San Francisco. So I was like, oh, that's really foggy. The next day I wake up and there is an office building. There's the San Francisco Bay, the Golden Gate Bridge. And I look at my mom and I was like, was it really foggy yesterday? And she goes, no, it was a sunny day. But my brain had not yet figured out how to process the information that my eyes were taking in. So that visual processing, when my neurosurgeon came in, he was like, oh yeah, that happens. It just takes your brain a minute to figure out how to process what you're seeing again. Wow. So the neuron pathways like rewired themselves. A lot of it just like on its own like that. And then a lot of it with stuff that I did later on. But now a lot of that sensory processing goes over where my language is too. And so like they overlap each other. Okay. So there's only like, I have to like try to find a way to decrease my sensory input sometimes, or to have very soothing sensory input when I know that I'm going to have to talk or when I know that I'm going to have to listen, especially. And that's one of those things that's kind of hard. But yeah, there are days like when I was working, one of the accommodations I asked for, which
so you did ask for accommodations?
I asked for accommodations. That was not received well. For 6 months, I had to go in and explain, yes, I have a brain injury, all of this kind of stuff to like, it was really kind of a humiliating process that they put me through to receive those accommodations. But one of the accommodations I asked for was the ability to work from home. Because there were days that I woke up and I was like, I'm either going to have the energy to do my job or I'm going to have the energy to take a shower, brush my teeth, put on clothes, you know? So I can do my job from home, just as well. And, you know, I think in a way, like, what we as a society went through during the pandemic did kind of give a lot of people a little bit of taste of that and a breath too. But I think it was just so overwhelming that our brains were overwhelmed. I think everybody's brains were overwhelmed during that time. You didn't know how to process what was happening. And I think that anxiety level and all of that people felt during that time, I think if people would look back on that and go, wow, there are people that feel that all the time. There are people that felt that for years before any of that happened. Just that, how do I handle, you know, people who were like, I don't know how to handle my kids being home and all of the chaos that came with it sometimes. That kind of overwhelmed feeling.
Like that dysregulation.
Yeah, exactly. People have lived with that their entire lives.
Dysregulation. When you talked about redirecting, you know, I remember that the first time I heard that term redirecting, a friend told me about when I was, you know, I had a son. My son was little, and you know, just interrupting what he was doing and redirecting him to another thing. Well, it's great to have that support when you're, you know, 2. But as an adult, even at 35, like I need help with redirection when sensory wise, I am overstimulated. So tell me some of the things that you do. First of all, how would you explain dysregulation? What does it feel like?
For me, it feels like my brain's on fire.
brain's on fire.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a reason to not to feel stuck.
Yeah. And I don't.
Do you feel any other sensations in your body or?
Very electrical.
Electrical.
And when I get like, I had epilepsy at one point.
Really?
Yeah, I did. And
before or
after my brain tumor. And so I developed epilepsy, and they got the epilepsy under control with medication. And then between, I think, I now have something that's called non-epileptic seizures. And it's basically, it starts, your body gets dysregulated. And so there are people who have non-epileptic seizures that their body is getting dysregulated without ever having epilepsy. About half of people that get epilepsy under control, it happens to them. I feel for a large group that it happens to is teenage girls. But basically your body is dysregulated, so it just starts shaking. And when I feel electrical, I know that I'm at risk of that too. And so it's, it's just.
I've often told my therapist, and it was so great when she like confirmed that another patient or client of hers experienced it, but I feel like my body is vibrating. So I told her the illustration of like hitting one of those big bells, and the ding, the reverberation afterwards. That's how I feel on the inside when I am dysregulated. And so it's kind of like, if we have 5 senses, right? They're all turned on and they're all at the highest, volume, the highest intensity at once. And so if you can imagine, that feels just like, the feeling on a plane when it's just like you hear the air, you hear like everything like kind of turning on and like just kind of swelling up almost. Like I felt that, that intensity. And it's really uncomfortable, and redirection is not always possible.
No, it's not.
It's not always possible. And I find that sometimes the only thing that I can do is lay down under my weighted blanket.
Yeah. Cocoon.
A cocoon.
That's
and
what I call
burrito
it.
myself. It's weird watching a kid be dysregulated, and it's weird watching someone witness you be dysregulated. What does it feel like when you have someone other than your husband, other than someone who knows you? Like, this is someone you've maybe just met, maybe you're at a conference, maybe you're somewhere, and you're dysregulated, like in public.
I have to get away from people.
Okay.
I will even I will walk into another room. I'll go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
I just have to get somewhere where I'm not worried about that societal pressure too,
Right.
Where I can just focus on me.
Right.
And I do feel like in the past year, and I wish that I had done this, I've lived with this for 23 years, and, I feel for, you don't know how many times I just thank God. And I was able to get through the first 28 years of my life. Neurotypical.
So you were neurotypical.
I was neurotypical. What made me neurodiverse is the brain surgery and my treatments for brain cancer.
Why? Did it make you, because of sensory processing?
Yes, because of the fact that I lost a part of my brain.
You lost a part of your brain.
And that's something people with brain injury, the way in which once after those injuries, you're neurodiverse, you're changed, And one of the really tough parts of having a brain injury is 2 things happen simultaneously. One, they encourage you to like do things to get back to normal or to get back to where you were, which there is no going back.
Right.
You know, once the brain is damaged, it's damaged. The brain can learn to function differently, and you can learn to function as best as you can differently. And then the other thing is they tell you, oh, your things are going to be limited. And so don't try to push yourself too much. So it's like they want you to like break out of the box, and then they put you in the box at the same time. And for me, having had brain cancer and the fact that I paid somebody $15,000 to do the damage to my brain so that I could live, it took me 7 years to realize that I even had a brain injury. I was so, I think, focused on survival that once I realized, oh God, like that's not growing back. I actually have a brain injury. These things that are happening because my brain is physically altered.
Right. I never even thought of like living part of your life as a neurotypical, and then something happens to where now you're neurodiverse. Do you remember what life was like?
Yeah, I do. I remember what it was like. And it was easier to navigate. I mean, I would get overwhelmed, you know, and those kind of things happened. And were there days that I was probably completely dysregulated? Yeah, there were, but they tended to be under extreme pressure, you know.
Not just the everyday simple things.
Yeah, or if I had, you know, not gotten a lot of sleep, you know, it was stuff like that. Or if I, you know, encountered a trauma, like, you know, after a car accident or something. So, and I say that there are also traumas that can, I think, permanently alter your ability to interact and process. So I don't want to say like any trauma, you're just like, oh, okay. Because words are hard.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I often tell people that actually I'm wearing a Process People shirt right now. And I remember when I picked out the shirt, I was like, can I wear this? And I had just told a friend yesterday, a fairly new friend. So, you know, hey, sometimes I take things literally, extremely literally. Hey, you know, the way my brain works and processes is just, they're just different. And so it's harder for me to speak in written form. So that would mean text message, that would mean email, that would mean, you know, even social media posts. Like I never feel like when I write social posts that it actually sounds like me.
Yeah.
Unless I'm doing something on my personal page, you know?
Yeah.
But voice is easier for me. Words to share, you know, with someone else, like when I'm talking with someone else, it's easier. So I use voice memos, and I will use a video if I have to, because words, and I don't even remember it always being like this, but maybe, I don't know. Words in written form is just hard. And we're talking about like such a, you know, a tentacle-filled topic. Like there's so many pieces to it. We talked about dysregulation. We talked about sensory processing, brain injury. Like it's a lot. Our brain is our main operating system.
Well, yeah, and it's so complex. Because there's our brain encompasses our personality. Yep. It encompasses our self-awareness, you know.
Did your personality change?
it intensified. My personality intensified. The funny thing is, when I was going into my brain surgery, I wasn't really that worried about dying. Okay. But I was worrying about waking up different. Because my daughter was probably about, she was just getting ready to turn 2. And so I was like, I don't want to wake up different. I don't want to wake up where I don't know her. I don't want to wake up where I can't feel love for her. And all of those things. And so when I came back out, my personality was just intensified. I mean, it was easier for me. I've always been a person that I'm attracted to joy, and I like sharing joy. And no, I'm an Aries. Really? People are always like, "You're an Aries?" Because
do people ask you if you're a Leo?
I don't know. People ask me if I'm different things, but yeah. Okay. But I'm like the intense love version of Aries. So I just like love, expressing love, offering love. Just like it just came more easily. I mean, I can't not tell somebody I love them. Right. Do you know what I mean? Right. Yeah. And that part just intensified. And so, but in a way, yeah, my personality did change. I was a lot more self-conscious when I was neurotypical. I mean, you know this, like everybody masks, everybody masks. Right. All of us mask in order to
cope, live,
exist. Neurodiverse people, the pressure on them to mask is a lot higher. Because
higher.
This is the thing. When you're neurodiverse, you really can't mask. Yeah. I mean, it just shows through, and so that's I love being with neurodiverse people because I know they don't have a hidden agenda. Right, they are who they are, and we get to see that. Right. And it's just amazing, whereas, I think the irony is if we didn't have like expectations of what our brains should be and how our brains should function, everybody would be a lot happier. And the brain is so complex. I like to think of the brain as like the ocean, because, we see it, we're like, oh, I have one of those. I've been to the ocean, I know what it is. I understand it a little bit. And so even like with science, we have this like surface level understanding, but neuroscientists will tell you there's so much more that we don't know, that we have yet to discover.
Don't want to know.
And yeah, that's the other thing.
I think we already know too much.
When we dig too deep, we're going to be afraid, like what's down there, right? And it's like the ocean, like that going deep. What are we going to find? And there's like the majority of it is still not yet explored. And I love, like you talk about where you geek out and stuff.
Tell me.
I geek out on getting more and more information about the brain and brain science. Okay. I listen to neuroscience lectures for fun.
Nice. I love that.
But again, I used to like read all the time. And for the longest time, I didn't read because my visual processing, the words will literally jump around on the page, which again, I'm like, oh my gosh, kids who have dyslexia, how did you ever learn to read? God bless you.
God bless, and especially in English.
Yeah. And so that things jump around. And so like for the longest time, I didn't have that. And then I discovered like, I don't know why. Again, this was a neurotypical, I think, imprinting on me that somehow listening to a book isn't really reading it. Yeah. You know, like the teacher read you the book. So it's not a book that you read that year, but yeah, it was, you know? And so, once I did that, I read all the time now because
You can listen.
I can listen. I read, while I'm driving. I can listen when I'm taking my shower. I'll listen. But yeah, neuroscience lectures. There's a master class that's on Audible and it's free. And there's a couple of them that are around neuroscience. So if any of you want to geek out, go for it.
So thank you for sharing your thoughts about, the dysregulation and what it feels like. I feel like we use all these words and it's important to say, like, what does it feel like? And if you want to geek out, one of the most amazing documentaries I've ever watched was Welcome to Earth with Will Smith. Have you watched it? Please watch it. Y'all, please go watch it. So good. He is anyways, it's incredible. Like, I could do a whole episode on that, but a lot of people don't like labels.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And historically, as a Black person, in school and things like that, getting labels was not a good thing. Being labeled was not a good thing. I've had a lot of labels in childhood and as an adult. And the one thing that can explain all of it is neurodiversity. I always challenged authority in school. I was getting suspended. Someone was being prejudiced. I called out my 5th grade teacher for being prejudiced and got suspended. I was just very, I knew I was always different. I knew, now I have this thing about content creators. I am convinced that content creators were the kids that were bullied in school, and they now get online and be themselves. And I love that because it gives us that like external processing, like to be able to say things outwardly about their human experience. So a few of the labels that I've gotten over the years, my first label was gifted. So I have been neurodiverse all my life, as opposed to you. So I don't know what it's like to have a neurotypical brain. I know that I've been around people, but I always saw my differences. Like as a child, I always enjoyed speaking to adults.
Yeah.
Later in life, as an adult, I had other labels like ADHD and most recently autism. And that wasn't a label from like a doctor or anything. That was me putting a name to my human experience. And it's weird as a Black girl to even identify or even go down and explore it's almost like coming out of a closet, right? But I love neurodiversity so much. Not so much that I've listened to lectures about it, but I could. I'm sure there's some type of podcast on it because I'm in a podcast right now. But I love labels because I think it helps us to explain what we experience. It's like the only thing that gives us language to explain experiences. What are your thoughts about labels?
Well, I think for me, it's a double-edged sword.
Why?
Because if a child is labeled early on,
do you think giftedness is a label?
I do. And I think, as somebody that I was more gifted at school too. I mean, I was top of my class most of the way through, I didn't have to work at it. It just came, I just retained the information. Prior to my brain cancer, I could literally just during a test reread the textbook right off the page. And I was like, okay, that's what the textbook said. It was on this side of the page and there was a little blue box above it. And, that visual memory that I had was like that. But it just, it came easy to me. And and learning and retaining information became very easy to me. And that's how I interacted with the world and processed the world. And so, I say it was neurotypical, but I have a hard time even understanding what that was, But I think labels, like my son has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. His biological mom drank when she was pregnant with him. And so he actually suffered his brain injury in the womb. And the labels that he got, his, like, I'm his third mom. And so my brother's sister had actually adopted him. And the school system that he was in when she died was not good. And they used corporal punishment. And if you know anything about kids that have any sensory sort of issues, corporal punishment is awful. It should not be used. It just should not.
That should be like an understood thing.
Yeah, if you're not mature enough to impose, like to realize that it's not. That's a tangent. Right. But anyway, that's for a whole nother podcast. But he got labels as troubled, and so the first two teachers that he had here when he came to Oklahoma, God bless them. God bless them, because they were amazing in terms of both of them had like a love of kids who were different, and a heart for it. And so like his first grade teacher, there were times when she was teaching the rest of the class and my son was wrapped around her ankles. And, she just realized that he needed that kind of moment there and that it was going to pass, But, and so there's... And he listens better when he's under a table. When his sensory world is limited, then he would hear better. So the labels then were used to hold him back.
Right. So obviously black and white thinking, I struggle with, but there's so many areas where it works for me.
Yes.
And it helps, and it's a good thing. But a label like being troubled versus, an autism or a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder label, those are different.
Right. Because one is a label like...
that something is inherently wrong.
That there is something different that needs to be accommodated.
Right.
And so I think that that's the thing. If people interacted with labels that way, if we all interacted with the labels that way, it would be much better. The problem... In what way? In the sense of like recognizing, this person has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. This person has autism. This person has, muscular dystrophy. And from the sense of accommodation, not from the sense of there's something wrong with. And that's why I think that it's a double-edged sword, because sometimes people will use the labels and it will give them like a heart for accommodation. But other times people will use the labels and it will give them a reason to exclude.
Do you think we're moving away from that, or is that something that we're still dealing with? Because I think if you, the term you use, like interacting with labels in that way, I mean, I have a shellfish allergy. So when I go to a restaurant, I tell my waiter, hey, I have a shellfish allergy. Mm-hmm. They go get the manager, bring them out. They talk to me because it's a life or death thing. And they're like, okay, thanks for letting me know. Is there anything we can do to accommodate you? Like for the menu, you know, and just, you know, sometimes I have people that just love seafood and they just want to go to a restaurant with seafood. And, you know, I'll check the menu. If there's something on there I can eat, then I'll go as long as things are fried separately, prepared separately, all those things.
Exactly.
But it's like we accept it. It's like, oh, she has a shellfish allergy, so she can't eat lobster. She can't drink after me when I eat lobster. And it's just accepted. Like there's no question. It's not like, are you sure you have a shellfish allergy?
Yeah.
Is there something wrong with you? How did you get that?
Yeah. And yes. And I see like all of that. I think the problem is the systemic nature of things like education or any institution, even like the workplace. Like the fact that I had to go in for 6 months
and plead my case
just to get a couch in my office so that after I had a seizure, I could lay down on the couch, or the understanding that I might have days where I had to work from home, but I could still work. I just would have to do it from home.
And that's the thing. You could still work.
Right.
There was nothing that it was just a change of environment. In 2015, I worked for the Department of Mental Health. I remember doing research. This was before any of this journey. I was just dealing with mental health issues. And I just remembered finding someone that talked about accommodations. That was the first time I had heard of that term. And I went to HR and it was like, how did you know about this? Like who, you know, like who told you?
Who told you?
Who told you?
Exactly.
And it helped me so much to escape now, they didn't let me work from home. I requested that. Mm-hmm. I even asked, hey, could you give me 2 days? But they did like let me have a walk and let me have a walk. I was an adult and they let me have a walk. They let me have a walk, Suzann.
Oh my God.
Have a walk. And and I worked 8 to 2, but you know, those accommodations.
Yeah. And that's like, I do think we're moving toward better.
You do?
I think that we're moving toward better.
We're nowhere near better.
But we're nowhere near where we need to be. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, it's like the issue with race in America. We're moving toward better. Are we anywhere close to where we need to be?
I don't think we're moving toward better.
No,
but
yeah.
I get you.
Yeah, well, and it's like, okay, I shouldn't speak into that, but as a woman, like with it being Women's History Month, one of the things that I'm doing in my business right now is I'm basing what I'm charging women this month on our pay differentials.
I saw your reel about that.
And so like when I was a kid, women were making, and at this point it was saying women, which it was based off white women, and we weren't breaking it down yet then, you know, but women were making like 73 cents to the dollar. And now, and that was white women. And now white women are making, they say 80 cents to the dollar. I think that's high. I never made higher than 77 cents to the dollar off of what my male colleagues were making, doing pretty much the exact same job. But so you can look at it and say, oh, we've got a few cents more. Do you know what I mean? But it's not anywhere where we need to be.
Right.
And there are things for women that are worse, I mean, that's the thing. So I look at it and I'm like, when I think about neurodiversity, we're moving toward better. But I also think that part of the increased awareness is this sense of, everybody, like all of us have some level of that, There's the whole all lives kind of thing that comes in, all brains kind of thing that comes into the equation. And you're like, oh, crap, no. And it's dangerous because I have a friend, my good friend, a very good friend of mine who is neurodiverse. I adore her. And we were talking one day because, like a lot of people who are neurodiverse, I have this issue too. If there is anything that is physically irritating my body, I cannot be present. I cannot be present. And she is the same way. And she had this shirt on one day that had elastic on the sleeves. And she was just like, I cannot hear you because there's elastic on my arm, elastic on my arm, elastic on my arm. That is the only thing going through the brain. And so she talked about, she was talking about something and she was saying, what, she goes, I understand that when people say, oh, yeah, that happens to me too, she goes, I understand that they're, yes, that affects them too. But what takes me 80% of my brain power may only take them 50% of my brain power. And I just stopped and I put my hand on her shoulder and I said, no, what takes you 80% of your brain power sometimes just takes them 5% of theirs.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's the thing. We have a longing to connect that is inherent within us. It's part of our species. It's part of that inherent built-in nature of us, so that when somebody says, I am dealing with this, the inherent nature within us is, oh, me too. I understand. We want to relate. And we're not realizing that if somebody is speaking into something, our experience is different. And we need to be comfortable in that difference and just hearing what their experience is.
I think we've done that in some areas like sexuality. But when it comes to brains and the human experience, we're hearing all these words kind of buzzing around. But there's no need to relate. There's only a need for space.
Exactly.
It's just providing space and holding
for
space
one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying about we're moving closer to maybe awareness of neurodiversity, but we're not moving closer to the accommodations that need to be made.
Because it involves
changing changing the
exactly.
system. Yeah.
It's about breaking to get real effective change in any of the areas that we're talking about, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's neurodiversity. Sometimes it involves breaking the system entirely down and thinking about how do we need to build it in order for it to be equitable for everyone. And that's one thing in the little areas of influence that I have that I was really intentional about doing. I worked in the church for 26 years as a minister. And the time of the year when I knew I was making a difference was 8 weeks during the summer when I was in charge of a partnership with AmeriCorps, where we had a camp that's called Project Transformation. And it's 8 weeks of reading assistance for kids. And I was very intentional in that in our population, I gave a preference towards foster families. And so probably about more than 50% of our kids were from foster families. I would say almost all of them. All of them struggled with reading. Mm-hmm. A large percentage of them, the reason they struggled with reading was neurodiversity issues. And then we had a few kids.
Like dyslexia.
Yes. And a lot of them, because of the foster situations, a lot of them too, it was trauma-induced neurodiverse issues that they were dealing with.
Which is a whole nother.
Which is, and that is something that, like, when you can accommodate that, it helps to heal the trauma. But like, I had a few kids that had like autism, and it was like, we're going to like totally, the rules are going to be, how do we create the best space for each kid to meet their needs? Mm-hmm. And so like with a couple of my autistic kids, they were not in the group stuff until they were ready to be in the group stuff. You know, they were doing their reading in my office. They were a lot of times participating in ways where like they would have somebody that could be just with them when they were in different rooms. And it is about, what do they need? And how do we meet that need? Just like when the manager of the restaurant comes out to you and it's like, how can we accommodate that need? Right. And
can you make me something off the menu, please?
Yes, exactly. And so that's the thing. When we set up the intention that the goal is not to mold into one type, the goal is to best serve the needs of every child, which that is hard to do in the way our educational system is currently structured. You know, I recognize that, but it's going to have, like, how do we create new systems?
I think these kids are going to be a lot more. They're a lot more aware of what they feel. For one, they have a lot of access to be able to identify their human experience with language. And so, you know, and we've also identified, we're in this creative class. So not the working class, but we're in like a creative class type era where a lot of creators are, you know, creating their own accommodations for their life, meaning, you know, they're deciding, you know, I'm going to try. No, it's not easier. It's not easier to build a life this way or build work this way, but they're finding alternate ways. So how to meet their own needs that the workplace, for example, is not meeting. So how do you meet your own needs? What does that look like in your life?
What it looks like in my life is, first of all, what I am doing professionally, like I have built my business and I am drawn to it because it is really empowering people to learn how to intentionally think through situations and to do it in a way that works for their brains. And my business is built for somebody with a brain injury. And so I work 3 days a week.
So less schedule,
yes,
less
and
work.
Everybody I work with, I am upfront and I say, here's the thing. I am a 23-year survivor of brain cancer. I have a brain injury. And so if there are days when my brain is not doing well, they already know that. And so when I say I need to reschedule this day, they know that. They knew that going into it. And they're, you know, I built in the expectation I might need a little bit of accommodation.
Built-in expectations. I love that.
Yeah. And I love to...
with people in your life.
Yeah. And when you talk about this generation where I see hope, one of my mantras is grown-ups are stupid. And the thing is, there is a difference to me in an adult and a grown-up too, because like it's just that perspective of, you know, when you grow up and you're supposed to have all these different ideas. So I always put my energy into the generations younger than me, and I'm Generation X. We were kind of the throwaway generation. Sort of proud of that sometimes. We own that, but I look at the generations younger than me, and that's where I see my hope.
Really?
Yeah. I'm like, as soon as we can get these generations older than me out of the way.
Once Suzann kicks the bucket.
Because the generations younger than me, I mean, like, there's so much more diversity, you know, there's just an acceptance. There's an acceptance of more inclusivity when it comes to race, more inclusivity when it comes to sexuality, more inclusivity when it comes to being different in any way. And I say that, and, you know, it's not that bullying and extreme ideas don't exist in those generations. It's just that there is more hope that's there. And so that's where and I'm also like, I am a joy person and I'm an optimist, like to the extreme.
Well, we need you.
Yeah, I know. But that's where I talked about it getting more intense. So,
we could all use that energy.
Yeah, but I have a lot of hope, and I have no idea what the original question was that got me talking.
Well, we're at time, but you know what? I love that we can end this conversation on having hope, because if anybody can use a dose of anything, neurotypical or neurodiverse, it is hope.
And I will say this, I hope you put my contact information in this, because if you are a parent of a neurodiverse child, it is hard. It is hard. Reach out to me, and reach out to Rachelle. We will be there for you. We will.
Well, I don't actually have the bandwidth to be there for you, but I can help you in your business.
I have the bandwidth.
I can help you in your business. But
yes, she is a genius. You're a genius too.
Oh,
because the way her brain thinks is the way my brain doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, is recognizing how our brains think. And there are other people out there whose brains think differently, and none of us are supposed to be able to do it all.
Right, exactly. So, we're not supposed to do it all. Yeah. No one alone. Thanks for hanging out. Thoughts About That was brought to you by the Possibilities Podcast platform.